From untouchable to up for grabs, a deep look into the political fights happening over school funding. How Utah's education earmark went from untouchable to up for grabs. Last week, we walked through Utah's 4 education funding streams and how they work together to cover operating and capital costs. This is important because in order to understand how the entire system works, you need to be clear on the base funding mechanisms. They are frequently the target for political change. This week, we're looking at how we got here because the rules governing all that money didn't arrive at once. The original 1946 earmark amendment sat almost completely untouched for half a century. Then it started getting chipped at, a little more each decade, until the last 4 years turned into an actual political fight. Come with us as we walk through time. 1946, the promise gets written down. Utah voters amended the Constitution to require that every dollar of state income tax go to education. At the time, that meant K-12 public schools specifically. It was a simple, sweeping commitment. This money, all of it, forever, for schools. For 50 years, that rule sat untouched on the books. 1996, the promise gets shared. 50 years later, voters approved an amendment that let income tax revenue also fund higher education, not just K-12. The earmark held, but the circle of who benefited from it got bigger to include Utah's colleges, universities, and technical schools. 2016, the rules around a second, smaller fund get tightened. This one is about the Permanent State School Fund, the endowment built from state trust land money known as SITLA. Amendment B, 2016, changed what could legally be pulled out of that fund from interest and dividends to earnings. It also capped annual distributions at 4% of the fund's value and changed the investment standard from safely to prudently. Small, technical-sounding changes, but they set the exact ceiling that Amendment B in 2024 would later raise. 2020, the earmark gets its first real crack. Amendment G expanded what income tax revenue could fund beyond education, adding, quote, supporting children and supporting people with a disability, end quote, to the list. This wasn't a fight anyone lost outright. It passed statewide with 54% of the vote, and it came bundled with a companion bill, HB 357, that created a funding stabilization framework promising to protect per-student education funding against inflation and enrollment charges. Education groups largely came around to support it because of that trade. But it was the first time in 74 years that the "it's for education, period" line moved at all. 2022, the name changes, which matters more than it sounds. Lawmakers passed SB 211, renaming the Education Fund to the Income Tax Fund. The bill's sponsor said it was just aligning the name with the 2020 change. No money moved. But names carry weight, and an education fund that gets renamed the Income Tax Fund is a fund that no longer sounds like it inherently belongs to schools. Turns out, that was useful framing for what came next. 2024, the real attempt and the technicality that killed it. In 2024, legislators proposed Amendment A, which would have removed the income tax earmark entirely, opening that revenue up to any state purpose. In exchange, the deal on offer was eliminating Utah's state sales tax on food, a trade lawmakers had already set up in 2023 through HB 54, which made the food tax repeal contingent on voters approving the earmark's removal. The Utah Education Association sued, arguing the ballot language was misleading. In the end, they didn't actually need to win that argument. A third district court judge voided the amendment on a separate, narrower ground that the state failed to publish the proposed constitutional change in newspapers statewide, 60 days before the election, a requirement under Article 23 of the Utah Constitution. That's the same defect that had already sunk a separate, unrelated ballot measure, Amendment D, a few weeks earlier. Legislative leaders chose not to appeal, and Amendment A still appeared on printed ballots, but any votes for it didn't count. It was a massive policy maneuver undone by missed paperwork. 2024, same ballot, the part that did pass. That same year, Amendment B was also on the ballot. It raised the permanent state school funds distribution cap from 4% to 5%, the number set by 2016's Amendment B. Unlike Amendment A, this one carried unanimous legislative support and passed easily, with 71% of voters in favor, because it didn't touch the earmark. It just let the trust land endowment we covered last week pay out a bit more each year. That's the direct reason SITLA distributions jumped to a record $134 million for the 2026-27 school year, instead of the $118 million schools would have otherwise received. So what's next? Amendment A will be back. Lawmakers have already said as much. Polling remains deadlocked at around 50% support in a 2023 poll, even with the food tax repeal attached to sweeten the deal. Whoever writes the next version knows it's a real fight, not a formality. This time, they'll almost certainly get the paperwork right. Next week, we're talking with Representative John Arthur on what we can expect and hope for when it comes to education in Utah. He's got big plans rooted in daily school life, and we're looking forward to hearing his ideas, giving us a real look at what policy changes mean for our kids. We're also excited to hear from Rebecca Cummings, Digital Matters Director at the University of Utah, about what the landscape looks like for higher education. Thanks for staying curious with us, and welcome back to school.